Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Rutland and Melton for an excellent speech, and can also thank the Labour front bench for suggesting that tone in this debate is very important. I see the Secretary of State is leaving at this moment in time, but I don't think that anybody will miss the irony of the Secretary of State projecting himself as the sole moral arbiter for the whole of the United Kingdom. And even worse, I believe he seeks to quell the just protests of honourable organisations and individuals who are trying to bring about decent change internationally. In Scotland, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have a proud history of promoting social justice, human rights and respect for international law in the world stage. And as the honourable member for Brent North alluded to in his earlier intervention, there's a very good example that we can provide in Scotland. In 1981, the then Glasgow District Council decided to award Nelson Mandela the freedom of the city, the first city in the world to do so. 5 years later, St George's Place in Glasgow city centre was renamed Nelson Mandela Place. Why was it renamed Nelson Mandela Place? Because the South African consulate was in St George's Place, and the council wanted to make sure that everybody knew who Nelson Mandela was by making sure his name was on the address of the South African consulate. And when Nelson Mandela addressed Glasgow City Chambers in 1993, he said, "While we were physically denied our freedom in the country of our birth, a city 6,000 miles away and as renowned as Glasgow refused to accept the legitimacy of the apartheid system and declared us to be free." Mr Deputy Speaker, if this proposed legislation had been in place during the 1980s, then Glasgow would likely have been legally debarred from taking the actions that it did, or even from suggesting that it might take those actions, because the then Conservative government in the 1980s did not support sanctions for South Africa. Indeed, I remember as a young lad seeing country after country after country boycott the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh in 1986 as a result of the then UK government's actions. Mr Deputy Speaker, SNP members will be supporting Labour's reasoned amendment today. However, there's only one key part of it is missing, and that is the attacks on the devolved administrations. And I want to come on to that, because perversely, the democratic elected Parliament and Government in Scotland would be required under this bill to give legislative assent to its enactment. We would be asked to provide the gag which silences our freedom of expression and that of the people we represent. As a good global citizen, Scotland is committed to the highest ethical and moral standards in human rights, in climate justice, in workers' rights and in economic development. The Scottish Government will always fulfil its obligations under international law and agreements, and the people of Scotland rightly expect that actions in Scotland should be taken with full consideration of moral and ethical duties to communities around the world, and we will not idly watch that good work being constrained. The UK... I'll give way.
I agree entirely with the points that he is making, and I just would point out to the House that the Welsh Labour Government has policies on such matters as modern slavery and also the defence of human rights. Public sector investment and procurement have evolved, yet this bill, impact assessment, does not consider any specific Welsh approaches. Does he agree with me that the government really should do this before taking any further steps?
Well, indeed, I note that probably there was no discussion with the devolved administrations in relation to this bill and the impacts that it would had or have on the devolved institutions. So I agree with my honourable friend, because yes, the UK government claims that the Scottish Government pursues actions which undermine UK foreign policy, but that's simply not the case, and it's not true. The Scottish Government has for many years conducted international engagement which benefits the people of Scotland and which aligns with present constitutional arrangements. Scottish Government ministers are simply embodying the values-based principles of the Scottish electorate, as the Welsh would do with the Welsh electorate. Mr Deputy Speaker, I listened to the Secretary of State arguing for this bill, and I have to say it's exactly... my apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do apologise. Listen to the Secretary of State, and certainly it gave the impression of the death rattle of what a dying government sounds like. The bill represents a desperate attempt by the UK government to salvage something from itself, from the wreckage it has created across the fields of international trade, diplomatic relations and human rights. And let's look at these fields in turn, and before I do so, I'll give way, and then I will, of course, give way.
I thank honourable friend for giving way, but does the gagging clause within it, which would actually stifle debate and discussion about policy, not also fit what we've seen over the last year or so in the Public Order Act, in the seizing of almost every power to hold a government to account into the executive itself, whether it's from the judiciary, voters, protesters, or even ourselves as MPs through Brexit, post-Brexit legislation?
And let me add, Madam Deputy Speaker, trade unions, workers who decide to take strike action, yes, we know who the government's enemies are because they've been legislating against their enemies in the last year since they crashed the economy last year, and I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Honourable Member for giving way. In Nottingham, we have significant numbers of people who have fled many countries perpetrating human rights abuses, Hong Kongers, people from other parts of the world, and they rightly don't want their councils or their universities to be complicit in human rights abuses that their family and friends continue to experience. So does he agree with me that public bodies must have the right to take a principled stance, for example, against the persecution of the people of Hong Kong, or against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, or political distance across China, for example?
Yes, I do agree with that, and I'm actually going to quote an exchange from the Honourable Lady and one of the ministers last week later on in my remarks, and she may want to intervene again. But of course I agree with that. I have eager Muslims as constituents. I know how serious the issues are. I have Kurdish constituents who are very concerned about the oppression of Kurdish people in Turkey and Syria, for example. And I'll always stand beside those people. But this bill would prevent public bodies and institutions from taking such steps, and that's a very real concern. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's leaving itself open to a new slogan, never mind the probity, feel the width. Its ability to grow trade is now severely constrained, so it seems to be selling off its old principles to the highest bidder. Previous attempts to work with others in making the world a decent place are now to be put aside. Rogue nations to be tolerated for the sake of business and their transgressions ignored. And that's this bill, being the dog's breakfast it is leaving themselves open to that charge. As Amnesty International UK are quite right to say that this bill would make it almost impossible for public bodies to use their procurement and investment policies to incentivise ethical business conduct that is human rights compliant. But maybe the objective is not surprising. From the UK being an original drafter of the European Convention on Human Rights, I note that there are some on the government benches who now wish the UK to leave that body. You would have hoped, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Conservative government might have learned from its disastrous policy of giving succour to the apartheid regime of South Africa. When the world railed against that regime, the then Conservative government turned a blind eye to it. And even though we already knew the consequences of appeasement from earlier experiences, we've learned in the last century what happens when governments don't have a conscience and turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. We've learned that responsibility lay not just at a national level, but also at a local level, and yes, even at the level of the individual. Now we're informed that giving expression to that conscience locally will be penalised under the law. It would appear that the only good conscience is a Tory conscience, as expressed by a government minister at Westminster. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I ask myself, why is the government pursuing this policy? Does every one of them want to stifle local democracy? Every society has its share of people who are mainly self-interested, with little concern for those outside their own circle. But it would be good to think that this proportion of society has shrunk as we become more aware of world affairs. But no, it still seems to be far too substantial. Suggests to the niche voters that principles are costly to us and that we can't now afford them. Yet this is a dangerous game, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's much easier to break down a society than to build it up, to make people isolationists rather than internationalists. Patching that fragment society together again would be a monumental task. But there is good news, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are some parts of the current United Kingdom where that dystopian dream is not being pursued. Quite the opposite, in fact. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had helpful support in our position regarding Israel, for example. On Thursday last week, at that very dispatch box, the International Trade Minister told this House the following: the UK has a clear position on Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. They are illegal under international law and constitute an obstacle to peace and the two-state solution. As set out in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office guidance on overseas business risks, there are clear risks to UK businesses related to economic and financial activities in the settlements, and we do not encourage or offer support to such activity. It closes. So the government's position seems to be, don't do it, we don't support it, but we're not going to allow people to boycott. I have to say that's a very confusing position that the government has found itself in, because the Secretary of State suggested that the bill does not stop boycotts in occupied territories. But actually, you just need to read the bill to say that's exactly what the bill is proposing. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to make it clear that the SNP, I'll give way in a second. I want to make it clear that the Scottish Government and the SNP unequivocally condemn and distance themselves from members or affiliates within the BDS movement who advocate a complete boycott of Israel and the Israeli people, and who suggest that the State of Israel does not even have the right to exist. And the Scottish Government is also committed to tackling all incidents of hate crime, working in partnership with a range of organisations, including Police Scotland. It would be a cruel distraction for the government to somehow equate sympathy and support for oppressed people with anti-Semitism. The bill now leads the government to be accused that there are good occupations and bad occupations. And as others have mentioned, I cannot vote for a bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, where I have eager Muslims who have children in camps. I cannot support a bill that would stop organisations from campaigning or boycotting Chinese goods on the basis of their treatment of eager Muslims. With Kurdish constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot support a bill that would support me or organisations or public bodies from boycotting goods coming from Turkey or Syria on the basis of the oppression that Kurdish people have. And I cannot support a bill which ignores environmental concerns. As Friends of the Earth said, the bill will prevent public bodies from diverting from fossil fuel, as well as diverting their money away from inadvertently funding human rights abuses abroad. That's what this bill does. The bill will make it illegal for public bodies, local authorities, to divest or boycott fossil fuel companies and companies with poor track records of protecting environmental standards. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish National Party, and I believe the Scottish people, will not participate in this diminution of freedom of speech and disregard for the well-being of our friends throughout the world. I earlier referred to the bill as the death rattle of a dying government. And can I say to ministers, you really should withdraw this bill. It's a complete and utter dog's breakfast. But if they do not, as well as supporting the reasoned amendment on behalf of the opposition, can I say to ministers, this bill does not deserve a second reading.